Sometimes the hardest part of losing someone isn't saying goodbye. It's learning how to live again when everything familiar is gone. 56-year-old Jonah Wells knew that pain all too well after his wife passed, leaving him with bills he couldn't pay and a heart he didn't know how to mend. He drove to the Montana mountains with his dog Murphy, hoping the quiet would help him start over. He took small jobs, chopping wood, fixing fences, just enough to get by. Then he met Frederick Alder, an elderly man living alone in a beautiful lodge by the lake. They became friends that winter, sharing meals and stories. When Frederick died, Jonah thought it was over. Then a lawyer arrived with a letter. Frederick left him everything. But why would a lonely old man give his entire estate to a stranger? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from and make sure you're subscribed. 3 months earlier, Jonah Wells had driven into Pine Haven, Montana, with everything he owned packed into the back of a 15-year-old pickup truck. Murphy, his golden retriever, sat in the passenger seat with his head out the window, tongue lolling in the cool mountain air. The dog didn't know they were running from anything. To Murphy, this was just another adventure. Jonah wished he could see it that way. The town appeared around a bend in the highway, like something from another era. Main Street stretched for perhaps 6 blocks, lined with brick buildings that had weathered a century of harsh winters. A diner with a faded red awning. A general store with a wooden porch. A post office that doubled as the town hall. Everything moved slower here, deliberately, as if the pace of modern life hadn't quite reached this pocket of wilderness. It was exactly what Jonah needed: anonymity, distance, a place where nobody knew him as the man who'd lost everything. He found a cabin for rent on the edge of town, advertised on a bulletin board outside the general store. The owner, a widow named Constance Gray, asked no questions beyond first and last month's rent. The cabin was small, one room with a wood stove, a lumpy bed, and a sink that dripped, but it had 4 walls and a roof that didn't leak. Murphy approved of the surrounding forest, which was all that really mattered. Jonah's savings gave him maybe 3 months if he was careful. After that, he'd need work. The odd jobs came slowly at first. He fixed a fence for Constance, chopped firewood for the diner owner, hauled supplies for an elderly rancher whose back had given out. The pay was modest, mostly cash, but it kept him fed. More importantly, it kept him busy. Busy meant less time to think about Helen, about the hospital bills that had swallowed their savings, about the house he'd lost, about waking up every morning to an empty bed. Murphy was his anchor. The dog needed walking, feeding, attention. There were days when Jonah wouldn't have gotten out of bed if not for Murphy's wet nose nudging his hand, those brown eyes full of patient expectation. So he got up, he walked, he worked, he survived. 6 weeks into his new life, Jonah stopped at the post office to mail a letter to his daughter in Seattle. Bertram Shaw, the postal clerk, was a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and an encyclopedic knowledge of everyone's business. He sorted mail with the precision of someone who'd been doing it for 40 years. "You're the fellow staying in Constance's cabin," Bertram said, not looking up from his sorting. "That's right, looking for work." "Always." Bertram pulled a note card from the bulletin board behind him. "Frederick Alder needs a handyman. Posted this 2 weeks ago. Nobody's taken it yet." Jonah studied the card. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned. Seeking reliable person for general maintenance and odd jobs. Reasonable pay. Call Frederick Alder. A phone number followed. "Who's Frederick Alder?" Jonah asked. Bertram's expression shifted, became more careful. "Owns the big lodge out by Crystal Lake. Been here longer than anybody. Keeps to himself mostly. Wealthy, I'd guess, though he never talks about it. Must be pushing 90 by now. Why hasn't anyone taken the job?" Frederick's particular. Turned down 3 people already. Said they weren't right. Bertram handed him the card. "You seem steady enough. Might be worth a try." Jonah called from a payphone outside the general store. The voice that answered was cultured, measured, with the kind of diction that spoke of education and refinement. "Mr. Alder, my name is Jonah Wells. Bertram Shaw gave me your number. I understand you need some help around your property." A pause. "Then what kind of work do you do, Mr. Wells?" "Whatever needs doing. Carpentry, repairs, maintenance. I'm dependable and I show up on time. Are you local? New to town. Staying in a cabin off Route 7. Another pause, longer this time. Come tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. The lodge is on Crystal Lake Road, 5 miles past the turnoff. You'll see the gate. The line went dead before Jonah could respond. The next morning, he followed the winding road along the lake. The gate, when he found it, was wrought iron and slightly rusted, standing open. A gravel drive curved through towering pines, and then the lodge came into view. Jonah stopped the truck and stared. The building was magnificent. 3 stories of timber and stone, with a wide wraparound porch and tall windows that reflected the morning light. It had the look of a grand hunting lodge from the early 1900s, the kind of place wealthy families once escaped to for summers. But time had taken its toll. Paint peeled from the window frames. The gardens were overgrown. Several shutters hung crooked. The whole place had an air of elegant neglect, like a duchess fallen on hard times. Frederick Alder stood on the porch waiting. He was tall despite his age, perhaps 6'2", with a full head of white hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore wool trousers, a flannel shirt and a cardigan that had seen better days. His face was lined with decades of weather and experience, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. Murphy bounded out of the truck first, tail wagging. Frederick's expression softened immediately. He knelt slowly, carefully, and held out his hand. Murphy approached and sniffed, then pushed his head under Frederick's palm for scratches. "Good judge of character," Frederick said, looking up at Jonah. "Dogs always are. His name's Murphy." "Hello, Murphy." Frederick stood with effort, one hand on the porch railing. "And you must be Jonah Wells." They shook hands. Frederick's grip was firm despite his age. "Beautiful place," Jonah said. "It was once." Frederick looked at the lodge with something like regret. "Now it's mostly a reminder of what I've let slide. Come inside. I'll show you what needs attention." The interior took Jonah's breath away. The main room had a cathedral ceiling with exposed beams. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, large enough to stand in. Furniture sat covered with white sheets, like ghosts of a more populated past. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Frederick led him through room after room, each more impressive than the last. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A dining room with a table that could seat 20. A kitchen with an old cast-iron stove and copper pots hanging from hooks. Everywhere the same pattern, grandeur fading into disrepair. "I built this 40 years ago," Frederick said, running his hand along a windowsill. "Or rather, I had it built. Seemed important at the time. Now it's just me rattling around in too much space." "No family?" Jonah asked, then immediately regretted the question. Too personal. But Frederick didn't seem offended. "No, never married. No children. A few distant cousins back east I haven't spoken to in decades." He glanced at Jonah. "What about you?" "Widower. 1 daughter, grown. Lives in Seattle." Frederick nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." They discussed the work. Gutters needed cleaning. Several windows needed recaulking. The dock down by the lake had loose boards. Firewood needed splitting and stacking for winter. Frederick offered $15 an hour, which was more than fair. "When can you start?" Frederick asked. "Tomorrow, if that works." "It does." Frederick walked him to the door, Murphy trailing behind. "One more thing, Mr. Wells. I value privacy and discretion. I don't need conversation or companionship. Just reliable work." Jonah recognized the statement for what it was, a wall built carefully over many years. He'd built a few of those himself lately. "Understood," he said. But as he drove away, watching the lodge disappear in his rearview mirror, Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that Frederick Alder was the loneliest man he'd ever met. And somehow, that made 2 of them. 2 months passed in a rhythm that became familiar, almost comfortable. Jonah arrived at the lodge each morning, worked until late afternoon, and drove back to his cabin as the sun dropped behind the mountains. The work was steady, the pay reliable, and slowly, so slowly he barely noticed, the knot in his chest began to loosen. Frederick kept his word about not needing conversation. The first few weeks, they barely spoke beyond what was necessary. "The gutters on the east side need attention. There's coffee in the kitchen if you want some." Lock the gate when you leave. But gradually, something shifted. It started with Murphy. The dog had adopted Frederick as a second person, greeting him with the same enthusiasm he reserved for Jonah. Frederick, despite his claims of wanting solitude, always had treats in his pocket. Jonah would find them together on the porch, Frederick in his chair, Murphy's head resting on the old man's knee, both of them watching the lake in companionable silence. Then came the invitations to lunch. Nothing formal, just Frederick mentioning there was soup on the stove, enough for two. They ate at the kitchen table, and the silences between them felt less like walls and more like understanding. By early December, when the first major snow arrived, Jonah realized he looked forward to his days at the lodge, not just for the work, but for Frederick's presence. The old man had a way of listening that made Jonah feel heard without judgment. When Jonah mentioned his wife in passing, Frederick simply nodded, his eyes conveying empathy that needed no words. The snow came heavy that December morning, thick flakes that muffled sound and blanketed the world in white. Jonah arrived to find Frederick's truck still in the garage, no smoke rising from the chimney. Unusual. Frederick was always up early, always had the fire going. Jonah knocked, then used the key Frederick had given him weeks ago. For emergencies, Frederick had said. He found Frederick in the living room, sitting in his chair, but hunched forward, one hand pressed to his chest. His breathing came in short-labored gasps. "Frederick, I'm fine," Frederick managed, but his face was grey, his lips pale. "Like hell you are." Jonah was already reaching for the phone. "I'm calling an ambulance." Frederick's hand shot out, surprisingly strong, gripping Jonah's wrist. "No hospitals. Just need to catch my breath. You're having a heart episode. You need help. I need you to sit down and stop hovering." Frederick's voice was sharp, but fear flickered in his eyes. "Hey, please," Jonah compromised. He helped Frederick to the couch, propped him up with pillows, brought water and the aspirin from the bathroom cabinet. He built up the fire, made tea, and settled into the chair opposite, watching Frederick's color slowly return. Murphy lay at Frederick's feet, chin on his paws, worried eyes tracking every movement. An hour passed, then two. Frederick's breathing eased. The tightness around his eyes relaxed. But something had changed. The episode had cracked something open, exposed the fragility neither of them had acknowledged. "I'm 91 years old," Frederick said finally, his voice quiet. "This body's been giving me warnings for months. I've been ignoring them. You should see a doctor." "What's the point?" Frederick looked at him, and for the first time Jonah saw weariness there. Not just physical, but soul deep. "I've lived a long life, Jonah, most of it alone. That was my choice, and I made peace with it years ago. Or thought I had." Jonah didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Frederick's gaze moved to the windows, to the snow falling beyond. "Do you know what the worst part of growing old alone is? It's not the loneliness, though, that's hard enough. It's the certainty that when you go, you leave nothing behind that matters. No children to remember you, no one whose life you genuinely shaped. Just things," he gestured vaguely at the lodge. "Buildings and furniture and objects that will be sold or thrown away by strangers who never knew your name." "That's not true," Jonah said. "You've built something here. This place is remarkable. This place is a monument to my own cowardice." The words came out bitter. Frederick closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." "That's unfair to you. You've been kind and I'm grateful for that. More than you know. Stay here tonight," Jonah said. "I'll sleep in the guest room. Just in case." He expected Frederick to refuse, to retreat behind his walls of privacy and independence. Instead, the old man simply nodded. That evening, after a simple dinner, Frederick seemed restless. He moved through the lodge like he was searching for something, finally settling in his study. Jonah followed, concerned. The study was smaller than the other rooms, more personal. Built-in bookshelves lined the walls. A heavy desk sat before the window. Papers and books covered every surface in organized chaos. Frederick stood at the desk, staring down at something Jonah couldn't see. "I've been thinking about legacy," Frederick said without turning. "What we leave behind, whether it means anything." He paused. "Have you ever made a choice that defined the rest of your life? One decision that sent you down a path you couldn't return from?" "Yes," Jonah said, thinking of all the overtime hours he'd worked, all the moments with Helen he'd postponed, believing there would always be more time. Frederick finally turned. In his hands was a leather-bound journal, worn with age. "I have too, and I've spent 50 years living with it." He held the journal for a moment longer, then set it deliberately on the desk where Jonah could see it. The page it was open to showed elegant handwriting. Dated 1958, Jonah caught fragments. Paris, Isabeau, the choice I must make. "Every man leaves something behind," Frederick said, meeting Jonah's eyes. "The question is whether it means anything, whether it helps anyone, whether it makes the world even slightly better than you found it." He paused. "You've been coming here for 2 months now. In that time, you've asked for nothing except honest work. You've been patient with an old man's moods. You've brought life back to this place, even if it's just you and that good dog of yours. Frederick, let me finish." The old man's voice was gentle but firm. "I don't have family, Jonah. No children, no grandchildren. But I have resources. I have this place. And for the first time in decades, I have someone I trust." He moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds. "What would you do with a second chance? If someone gave you the opportunity to start over, to build something meaningful, what would you do with it?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Jonah didn't fully understand. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I'm just trying to get through each day." Frederick nodded slowly. "I understand that. I've lived years that way myself." He turned back to Jonah. "But survival isn't living, and you deserve better than just surviving. You deserve a purpose. So do you." A small, sad smile touched Frederick's lips. "My purposes are behind me. But maybe, just maybe, I can help you find yours." He gestured to the journal. "That's a story for another time. But know this, everything I've done, everything I'm about to do, is intentional. And it's because you showed up. Not for what you could get, but just because you're a decent man who shows up when he's needed." Jonah felt something shift in the room, in the dynamic between them. Frederick wasn't just talking about handyman work anymore. "Thank you," Frederick said quietly, "for staying tonight, for caring enough to notice an old man wasn't well. That means more than you know." That night, as Jonah lay in the guest room with Murphy curled at his feet, he thought about Frederick's words, about choices and second chances, about the journal left open on the desk, an invitation to understand. He didn't know what Frederick was planning, but he sensed with absolute certainty that something had changed between them, something profound and irrevocable. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the lodge in white silence. The health scare changed everything. Frederick recovered, but a new urgency entered their interactions. He moved more deliberately now, as if conscious of each movement's cost. And he began teaching Jonah about the lodge in ways that went beyond simple maintenance. Mid-December arrived with crystalline cold and skies so blue they hurt to look at. Jonah came every day now, sometimes staying through dinner. The pretense of employer and employee had quietly dissolved into something else. Friendship, perhaps, though neither man named it that way. Frederick started sharing stories about his years in the diplomatic service, the cities he'd lived in, the languages he'd learned. He spoke of post-war Europe, of rebuilding and hope, of a world trying to piece itself back together. But there were gaps in his stories, places where he'd pause and change direction, as if certain memories were too painful to touch. Isabeau's name came up more frequently now, always in passing, never explained. Isabeau loved winter mornings like this. There was a cafe in Paris where Isabeau and I would have coffee. Each mention was a small window into a past Frederick kept carefully guarded. One afternoon, Frederick led Jonah through the lodge with new intention, not showing him what needed repair, but what the place truly was. "This wood is Douglas fir," Frederick said, running his hand along a beam in the great room. "Harvested from this property before the lodge was built. See the grain? The craftsmanship? They don't build like this anymore." He pointed to the stone fireplace. "River rock gathered from the lake shore. Took 2 men an entire summer to construct this." In the library, Frederick pulled books from shelves, showing Jonah first editions, signed copies, volumes in French and Italian and German. I collected these over 40 years. Each one has a memory attached. This Hemingway bought it in a bookshop in Barcelona in 1961. This poetry collection, a gift from a colleague in Rome. Jonah began to understand. Frederick wasn't just showing him a house. He was sharing a life, preserved in objects and spaces. They stood in the dining room, looking at the long table that had likely never hosted a full meal. I bought this thinking I'd have a family, Frederick said quietly. Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas gatherings, grandchildren running through these halls. Instead, it's gathered dust for 4 decades. He touched the wood gently. Funny how we build monuments to futures that never arrive. That evening, as they sat by the fire with Murphy stretched between them, Frederick retrieved something from his desk drawer. A small bronze key, old and tarnished. "There's a room on the 3rd floor," Frederick said, holding the key in his palm. "I haven't opened it in 26 years. I want you to have this key." Jonah stared at it. "Frederick, I can't. Not to use now. But when the time comes, you'll know." Frederick pressed the key into Jonah's hand. "Inside that room is everything I couldn't face. Everything I've kept locked away because it hurt too much to remember. But someone should know it exists. Someone should understand." The key was warm from Frederick's hand, surprisingly heavy. "Why me?" Jonah asked. Frederick was quiet for a long moment. "Because you understand loss. Because you ask for nothing. Because in 2 months you've shown me more genuine care than most people do in a lifetime." He met Jonah's eyes. "Because I trust you, Jonah, and at my age, trust is the rarest gift I have to give." The words settled between them, weighted with meaning. The next morning, Bertram Shaw pulled Jonah aside at the post office. "Saw Frederick's lawyer in town yesterday," Bertram said, his tone carefully neutral. "Gwendolyn Pierce. She was at the courthouse for hours." Jonah sorted through his mail, saying nothing. "People are talking," Bertram continued. "About you and Frederick. About how much time you spend out there. I work for him. That's not what I mean." Bertram's expression was difficult to read. "Frederick Alder's been alone for 40 years. Never let anyone close. Now suddenly he's got a handyman practically living at the lodge. Lawyer visits. Estate planning." He paused. "Just want you to know what folks are saying." "What are they saying?" "That you saw an opportunity. Rich old man, no family, vulnerable. That you're positioning yourself." The accusation hit harder than Jonah expected. Heat rose in his face. "That's not—" "I know," Bertram said quickly. "I've watched you, Jonah, watched how you are with him. But not everyone's as observant as me. Just thought you should know." Jonah drove back to the lodge angry and unsettled. Was that how people saw him? As some kind of opportunist? He'd never asked Frederick for anything beyond wages for honest work. Never angled for more. Frederick noticed his mood immediately. "What's wrong?" Jonah hesitated, then told him about the conversation. Frederick's expression darkened. "I see." He was quiet for a moment. "Does it bother you? What people think?" "Yes," Jonah admitted. "I don't want anyone thinking I'm taking advantage of you." "Are you?" "No." "Then their opinions are irrelevant." Frederick's voice was firm. "I've lived long enough to learn this, Jonah. The people who matter least often speak the loudest. Those who judge quickly usually understand nothing." He put a hand on Jonah's shoulder. "I know your character. That's what matters. The rest is just noise." But the seed of doubt had been planted. That evening Jonah tried to refuse dinner. Said he should probably head back to his cabin, give Frederick some space. Frederick saw right through it. "Don't let small minds make you small," he said. "Don't let their suspicions rob us both of this friendship. Because that's what this is, isn't it? Friendship?" Jonah nodded, throat tight. "Good, then stay for dinner. And tomorrow and the day after. We'll give them something real to talk about." Over the following days, Frederick continued his subtle instruction. He showed Jonah the property boundaries, walked him through the grounds despite the cold, pointed out landmarks where an old greenhouse had stood, where he'd planned to build a workshop, where the gardens could be restored. "This land has potential," Frederick said, breath misting in the winter air. "Always has. I just never had the energy or the vision to realize it alone." He taught Jonah how to work the old generator in the basement, where the water shutoffs were located, which windows stuck and needed special handling. Practical knowledge, but delivered with the care of someone passing on something precious. One evening, Frederick retrieved a folder from his desk. Inside were sketches and notes, plans for the property. "I drew these years ago," he said, spreading them across the table. "Dreams I never pursued. A restored garden here, a walking path through the woods, a dock rebuilt properly where someone could sit and watch the sunrise." Jonah studied the drawings. They were detailed, thoughtful, beautiful. "You should do this," he said. Frederick smiled sadly. "My time for doing has passed, but perhaps someone else's hasn't." He met Jonah's eyes. "You've given me something, Jonah. Hope, maybe. Or just proof that I can still connect with another human being. That's worth more than you know." "You've given me something, too," Jonah said quietly. "A reason to get up in the morning. Purpose. Something beyond just surviving." Frederick's expression softened. "Then we've both been fortunate." That night, as Jonah drove home with Murphy beside him, the bronze key heavy in his pocket, he realized something had fundamentally shifted. The lodge had become more than a job. Frederick had become more than an employer. They had become, against all odds, and despite their wounds, something like family. And that terrified him, almost as much as it comforted him. Late December brought preparations for Christmas, though neither man spoke much about the holiday. It carried too much weight, memories of celebrations past, of people no longer present. Jonah had planned to spend the day alone in his cabin. His daughter had invited him to Seattle, but the thought of pretending to be fine, of making conversation and smiling through the pain, exhausted him before he even started. Better to stay here, let the day pass quietly. Frederick had other ideas. "Spend Christmas at the lodge," he said one afternoon, not quite meeting Jonah's eyes. "I'll cook. We'll make a day of it. Nothing elaborate, just 2 old men and a good dog." Jonah wanted to refuse. Christmas without Helen felt like betrayal, like admitting she was really gone. But Frederick's carefully casual tone revealed the loneliness underneath, and Jonah couldn't bring himself to leave the old man alone. "All right," he said. "Thank you." Christmas morning arrived cold and clear. Jonah drove to the lodge with Murphy and a bottle of wine he'd bought in town. Frederick had decorated modestly, a small tree in the corner, white lights in the windows. It was understated, dignified, exactly what Jonah needed. They cooked together, moving around the kitchen with surprising ease. Frederick prepared a roast. Jonah handled vegetables. Murphy supervised from his spot by the stove, alert for anything that might fall. After lunch, as they sat by the fire, Frederick retrieved something from his study. A stack of letters tied with string, yellowed with age. "I want to show you something," Frederick said. "Something I've never shown anyone." He handed Jonah the top letter. The envelope was addressed to Isabeau Moreau in Paris, but it had never been sent. The date, 1965. "Go ahead," Frederick said. "Read it." Jonah opened the envelope carefully. The letter was handwritten, Frederick's elegant script filling 2 pages. It spoke of regret, of a choice made 7 years earlier, of love that hadn't faded despite time and distance. "There are 40 years of letters here," Frederick said quietly. "Written to a woman I loved and left. Never sent a single one. Why not? Pride, fear, the certainty that she'd moved on and didn't want to hear from the man who'd abandoned her." Frederick stared into the fire. "I met Isabeau in Paris in 1958. I was a junior diplomat, 28 years old, ambitious and certain of my path. She was a widow with a young daughter working as a translator. We fell in love that spring." His voice grew distant, remembering. "It was the kind of love that changes everything. Suddenly my career, my plans, none of it mattered as much as she did. We talked about marriage, about building a life together." He paused. "Then I was offered a promotion, deputy attaché to Singapore. Significant position, career-making. But it meant leaving immediately, leaving her. What did she want you to do?" "She never asked me to stay." "That's what made it harder. She said she'd wait, that we'd find a way. But I was young and foolish and convinced my career had to come first. I told myself I'd return within a year, that we'd pick up where we left off." Frederick's hands trembled slightly as he took another letter from the stack. I returned 18 months later. She was gone, remarried to a school teacher, giving her daughter the stable home she needed. I'd waited too long, and she'd made a practical choice. I couldn't blame her. Did you ever speak to her again? No, I left Paris, threw myself into my work, built my career. Made good money, earned respect, traveled the world. Bought this land, built this lodge, thinking someday I'd find someone else. I never did. He met Jonah's eyes. I chose the wrong thing, Jonah, and I've spent 50 years knowing it. The admission hung heavy in the room. Jonah thought about his own regrets, the overtime shifts, the postponed vacations, all the times he'd told Helen next year, or when things settled down. What do you regret most? Frederick asked. About your wife. The question caught Jonah unprepared. He'd been avoiding this territory, keeping Helen's memory carefully contained. Time, he said finally. All the time I wasted thinking we had forever. She wanted to travel. I said we'd go when I retired. She wanted to take dance lessons together. I said I was too tired. She wanted my attention, and I gave her my distraction. His voice cracked. I thought there would be more time. There wasn't, Frederick nodded slowly. That's the cruelest trick of all, isn't it? We assume we have tomorrow. We plan for futures that never arrive. And by the time we understand what truly matters, it's too late. They sat in silence, two men mourning different losses that felt remarkably similar. Don't waste your second act the way I wasted mine, Frederick said finally. You're only 56. You have years ahead of you. Don't spend them alone out of guilt or grief. Helen wouldn't want that. How do you know what she'd want? Because if she loved you, and clearly she did, she'd want you to live. Really live, not just survive. Frederick gestured at the letters. I turned my regret into a shrine. Spent decades writing to a ghost, building a monument to my own loneliness. Don't make my mistakes, Jonah. Later, as evening fell, they sat in companionable silence. The fire crackled. Murphy snored softly. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and steady. This is the best Christmas I've had in 40 years, Frederick said quietly. Jonah realized it was his best in 2 years. Not happy exactly. The grief was still there, the awareness of who was missing. But peaceful, connected, real. Thank you for inviting me, Jonah said. Thank you for coming. Thank you for these months. For showing up day after day, asking nothing but giving everything. Frederick's voice grew thick. You've given an old man something I thought I'd lost. Proof that connection is still possible. That it's not too late to do one thing right. The words settled over Jonah like a blessing and a burden. He sensed Frederick was trying to tell him something, preparing him for something, but he didn't fully understand what. That night, driving home through the snow, the bronze key in his pocket felt heavier than before. The locked room on the 3rd floor. The unsent letters. Frederick's stories of choices and regret. All of it pointed toward something Jonah couldn't quite see yet. But he felt it coming, like a storm building on the horizon. Murphy whined softly from the passenger seat, sensing Jonah's unease. I know, boy, Jonah said quietly. I know. He looked back at the lodge in his rearview mirror, its windows glowing warm against the winter darkness. Inside, Frederick would be banking the fire, washing the dishes, moving through the beautiful empty rooms alone. Jonah realized with sudden clarity that he loved the old man. Not like family exactly, but close. Like someone who'd become essential when he wasn't looking. And that made what was coming, whatever it was, even more frightening. Because Jonah had already lost too much. He didn't know if he could bear losing anyone else. January arrived with the kind of cold that made everything brittle. The lake froze solid. The trees cracked in the night. Jonah's breath formed clouds even inside his poorly insulated cabin. He spent more time at the lodge now, partially because Frederick needed more help, partially because the lodge was warmer, but mostly because he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Frederick's health had stabilized, but not improved. He tired more easily, moved more carefully. Some mornings his hands shook so badly he couldn't hold a coffee cup steady. He never complained, but Jonah saw the frustration in his eyes, a sharp mind trapped in a failing body. One afternoon, Jonah found Frederick standing before an easel in the sunroom, staring at a half-finished painting. The image showed the lodge in springtime, gardens in full bloom, the lake sparkling beyond. It was beautiful, skilled work that surprised Jonah completely. "I didn't know you painted," he said. Frederick didn't turn. "I don't anymore. My hands won't cooperate." He gestured at the canvas. "I did this 20 years ago. Never finished it. Kept meaning to, but there was always tomorrow. It's remarkable." "It's a lie." Frederick's voice was bitter. "Those gardens never bloomed like that. I never planted them. Just painted what I imagined what could have been." He moved away from the easel. "Come with me. I want to show you something." They walked through the lodge, Frederick opening doors to rooms Jonah had never entered. Each one revealed more paintings, cityscapes, portraits, landscapes. Paris in the rain, a Mediterranean coastline, a woman's face, beautiful and sad, rendered with obvious love. "Isabeau," Frederick said softly, seeing where Jonah's attention had gone. The paintings were everywhere, hidden away like secrets. Frederick had been genuinely talented, possibly even gifted. Yet he'd kept this skill private, shared it with no one. "Why didn't you ever show these?" Jonah asked. "Sell them? Exhibit them?" "Because they were mine. The only things I created that were truly mine. Not for career or appearance or anyone's approval. Just for me." Frederick touched the edge of one frame. "Proof I could still feel something after I left her. That I wasn't completely hollow inside." They returned to the sunroom. Frederick settled into a chair by the window, looking exhausted from the brief tour. "I want you to have them," he said. "The paintings, when I'm gone." "Frederick, let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "I'm 91 years old, Jonah. I've had a good run, longer than most. But I'm tired and this body is wearing out. We both know it." He met Jonah's eyes. "I've been putting my affairs in order, making arrangements, ensuring things are handled properly." Jonah's chest tightened. "You don't need to talk about this." "Yes, I do. Because someone needs to know what I want. Someone needs to understand." Frederick gestured around the sunroom. "This place, these things, they need purpose. They need to matter to someone. You're the only person who's shown genuine care, not for what I own, but for who I am. That's rare, Jonah, precious." Before Jonah could respond, Frederick continued. "I've been teaching you about the property, showing you how things work, where everything is. You've noticed, haven't you?" "Yes." "Good, because I need you to understand something." Frederick leaned forward. "This lodge was meant to be a home, a place full of life and love and family. I built it for a future I never claimed. Now it's just a monument to my mistakes. But it doesn't have to stay that way." He pulled out a folded paper from his pocket, the annotated property map Jonah had seen before. Frederick spread it across his lap, pointing to various markings. "These notes, these are dreams I never pursued. This area here, perfect for gardens. This spot, ideal for a workshop or studio. The old greenhouse foundation could be rebuilt. The dock, properly constructed, would be perfect for watching sunrises." His finger traced paths through the property. "I marked all of this 40 years ago, never acted on any of it. Why not? Because I was alone, and doing it alone felt pointless. Creating beauty no one would see, building spaces no one would use." Frederick folded the map carefully. "I'm giving this to you, not as an employee, but as someone who might understand what I couldn't, that creating something meaningful matters, even if you're the only one who sees it. Especially then." Jonah didn't know what to say. The gift felt too large, the implications too heavy. The next day, his landlord Constance appeared at the cabin with bad news. Her son needed a place to stay, would be moving into the cabin in 2 weeks. She apologized profusely, offered to help him find something else, but Pine Haven had limited rentals, and most were beyond Jonah's budget. When Frederick learned about this, his response was immediate. "Move into the guest house here. It's winterized, furnished, sitting empty. You'd be close by if I need help, and Murphy would have room to run." "I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because people already think I'm taking advantage of you. Moving onto your property would just confirm their suspicions." Frederick's expression hardened. "I don't care what people think, and neither should you. This solves a practical problem for both of us. You need housing. I need help. We're not children seeking approval from small-minded gossips." "Frederick, Pride is expensive, Jonah, and ultimately pointless. I'm offering you a place to live, and you're refusing because of what strangers might whisper. Meanwhile, you'll end up in some overpriced apartment in a worse situation, and I'll be here alone, worrying about whether you're warm enough." He paused. "Don't make me watch someone I care about suffer needlessly because you're worried about appearances." The words, "someone I care about," landed heavily between them. Jonah moved into the guest house 3 days later. It was small but comfortable. 1 bedroom, a living area, a kitchenette. More importantly, it had heat that worked and windows that didn't leak. Murphy immediately claimed the couch as his territory. The arrangement changed their dynamic. Jonah was no longer a visiting employee, but a resident, part of the property's daily rhythm. He joined Frederick for breakfast most mornings. They took walks through the snow-covered grounds, Frederick pointing out features and sharing stories. Evening often found them by the fire, comfortable in silence or deep in conversation. But the town noticed. Bertram Shaw delivered mail with knowing looks. Jonah overheard conversations in the general store that stopped when he entered. The whispers followed him. Gold digger, con man, taking advantage of a lonely old man. It stung more than he wanted to admit. Frederick noticed his mood, confronted him directly one evening. "You're letting them get to you. They think I'm using you. They're wrong. Are they? I'm living on your property rent-free, spending every day here. From the outside, it looks exactly like what they're saying." Frederick was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that cut through all of Jonah's doubt. "The people who matter least often speak the loudest. They see only surfaces, never depth. They don't know that you stayed when I was sick. They don't know you listen when I talk about regrets. They don't know you've given me the only thing that matters, proof that I'm still human, still capable of connection." He met Jonah's eyes. "I know who you are, Jonah. That's what matters. Everything else is just noise." Late January brought a cold snap that lasted for days. The thermometer never rose above 0. Jonah kept the fires burning at both the lodge and the guest house, chopping wood until his shoulders ached. Frederick stayed inside mostly, wrapped in blankets despite the heat, his body struggling against the brutal cold. One afternoon, Jonah found Frederick in the sunroom again, standing before the unfinished painting with an expression of profound sadness. "I wanted to add more," Frederick said. "Finish what I started, but my hands won't listen anymore." He held them up. The tremor was worse than usual. "Frustrating, being betrayed by your own body." "You could tell me what to add," Jonah suggested. "I could paint it for you." Frederick smiled but shook his head. "That's kind, but it wouldn't be the same. Some things can't be delegated." He turned from the easel. "Besides, maybe it's better unfinished. More honest that way. A testament to intention rather than completion." Over the following weeks, Frederick began a ritual that Jonah didn't immediately understand. He'd call Jonah into various rooms, hand him objects and tell their stories. A pocket watch, gold and heavy. "This was my father's. He was a railroad conductor, died when I was 12. Taught me that showing up on time matters, that reliability is a form of respect. I've carried this for 70 years, a compass, brass and worn. Carried this through 20 countries, used it to navigate more than geography, used it to remind myself there's always a way forward, even when you're lost. Though it didn't help when I got lost in the ways that truly mattered. A fountain pen, elegant and old. Wrote every one of those letters to Isabeau with this. Every report for the State Department. Every journal entry. It's documented my entire adult life." He pressed it into Jonah's palm. "Words matter. What we say, how we say it. This pen knew that. Each gift came with protest from Jonah, insistence from Frederick. Things are just things without someone to remember their stories," Frederick said. "I'm giving you context, not objects. I'm giving you memory." One cold afternoon, a black sedan pulled up to the lodge. A woman emerged, tall, professional, carrying a leather briefcase. Gwendolyn Pierce, attorney at law. Frederick asked Jonah to leave them alone. Just for an hour or so. Take Murphy for a walk. Give us privacy. Jonah felt a knot of anxiety form in his stomach. He knew what this likely meant. Frederick was finalizing his estate, making end-of-life arrangements. The reality of Frederick's mortality, which had been hovering at the edges of Jonah's awareness, suddenly became concrete and unavoidable. He walked the property with Murphy, the cold biting through his coat. When had this happened? When had Frederick become so essential to his daily life? 3 months ago, Jonah had been alone and preferred it that way. Now the thought of losing Frederick felt like losing Helen all over again. Another hole torn in the fabric of his world. When he returned, Gwendolyn Pierce was leaving. She nodded politely at Jonah but said nothing. Frederick stood on the porch looking lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. "Everything all right?" Jonah asked. "Yes, just took care of some necessary business. Things I should have handled years ago," Frederick smiled. "Come inside. It's too cold out here." They settled by the fire with coffee. Murphy stretched between them, his usual position. Frederick seemed content, peaceful even. "I've done what needed doing," he said cryptically. "Put things in order. Made my wishes clear. That's all any of us can do, really. Be clear about what we want and trust it'll be honored." Jonah wanted to ask what he meant, what he'd arranged, but Frederick's tone suggested the subject was closed. Instead, they spent the evening as they often did now, Frederick talking about his past, Jonah listening. But tonight, Frederick's stories took a different direction. He spoke about his regrets with a clarity that felt like confession. "I bought this property in 1985, Frederick said. "I was 53, old enough to know better, young enough to still hope. I hired architects, spent a fortune, built this place exactly as I imagined it. The lodge, where I'd finally build the life I'd thrown away in Paris." He gazed around the room. "Seeing ghosts, Jonah couldn't. I imagined children here, grandchildren, Christmas mornings with presents under the tree, summer afternoons with family gathered on the porch. I designed every room with purpose. This one for reading together, that one for music, another for art projects with kids." His voice grew thick. "I built a home for a family I never had, a monument to magical thinking." "It's not too late," Jonah said, though even as he spoke they both knew it was. "It is for me, but maybe not for someone else." Frederick met his eyes. "You asked me once why I'm showing you all of this, teaching you about the property, sharing these stories. You want to know?" "Yes. Because this place deserves better than dying with me. It deserves to become what I intended, a home, a place of purpose and connection. I couldn't give it that. But someone else could." He paused. "Someone who understands loss, someone who knows what it means to start over, someone who'd honor what this place was meant to be." The implication hung in the air, but Jonah didn't push. Frederick would say what he meant to say in his own time. That evening, as they sat in comfortable silence, Frederick asked a question that seemed simple, but wasn't. "Are you happy here, Jonah?" Jonah considered the question seriously. Happy wasn't quite right. He still carried grief, still missed Helen, still had moments of profound sadness. But something had shifted, yes, he said finally. "More than I've been since Helen died. This place, these days with you, they've given me something I didn't know I needed. Not happiness exactly, but peace. Purpose, a reason to keep going beyond just going through motions." Frederick's expression softened with relief, satisfaction, something that looked almost like love. "Good," he said quietly. "That's all I needed to know. That you're not just surviving here, but actually living. That this place has given you something real." They sat as the fire burned low, Murphy snoring softly. Outside, the temperature dropped further. But inside the lodge, warmth and companionship made a shelter against the cold. Jonah looked at Frederick, this man who'd become so important in such a short time, and felt a surge of gratitude mixed with dread. Frederick was preparing him for something. All the gifts, the stories, the teaching, all the careful instruction about the property and the pointed conversations about legacy and purpose. Frederick was saying goodbye in the only way he knew how. Slowly, deliberately, making sure Jonah understood what mattered, and though neither of them spoke the words aloud, they both felt it, the awareness that their time together was limited, that winter wouldn't last forever, that nothing beautiful ever does. But for now, in this moment, they had the fire and the quiet and each other's company. For now, that was enough. Early March arrived with the first hints of thaw. Patches of bare ground appeared where the snow had retreated. The lake ice began to crack and groan. Frederick stood at the window watching these signs of spring with an expression Jonah couldn't quite read. Longing, perhaps, or resignation. "I won't see summer," Frederick said one morning, matter of fact. "I can feel it. The body knows when it's finishing up. Don't talk like that. Why not? It's the truth. And I've made peace with it." Frederick turned from the window. "I'm tired, Jonah, ready. The only thing that bothers me is leaving you alone again." Right when you were starting to heal. Before Jonah could respond, Frederick swayed suddenly, gripping the windowsill for support. Jonah was across the room in seconds, catching him as his knees buckled. "Hospital," Jonah said firmly. "Now." This time, Frederick didn't argue. The collapse was serious. Heart arrhythmia, dehydration, the accumulated toll of age, and a body that had endured too many winters. They kept him for 3 days, running tests, adjusting medications, speaking in the careful tones doctors use when the prognosis isn't good. Jonah stayed. He slept in the chair beside Frederick's bed, brought him books from home, walked Murphy in the hospital parking lot, and smuggled him in after visiting hours because Frederick asked to see the dog. The hospital staff assumed Jonah was Frederick's son. He didn't correct them. "You don't have to stay," Frederick said on the second night. "You have your own life." "This is my life," Jonah replied. "Right here." Something passed between them then, acknowledgement of what they'd become to each other. Not employer and employee, not quite family, but something equally profound. 2 lonely men who'd found connection when neither was looking for it. Frederick was released on the 3rd day with strict instructions: rest, medication, no exertion. But they both knew what the doctors weren't saying. This was the beginning of the end. Back at the lodge, Frederick moved more carefully, as if afraid of breaking. He tired after simple tasks, dressing, eating, walking from room to room. Jonah helped without making it obvious, preserving Frederick's dignity even as the old man's independence slipped away. 2 weeks passed. Frederick rallied slightly, had good days mixed with difficult ones. On the good days, they sat on the porch watching spring arrive. On the difficult ones, Frederick stayed in bed, drifting in and out of sleep. One clear afternoon in late March, Frederick called Jonah into his study. He sat at his desk with an envelope in his hands, sealed with wax. "I need you to promise me something," Frederick said. "Anything. Don't open this until after I'm gone. But know that everything I've done, everything I'm about to do, has been for a reason." He pressed the envelope into Jonah's hands. "You'll understand when the time comes. You'll probably be angry. You might even hate me for a while. But I hope eventually you'll see why I did what I did. Frederick, you're scaring me. Don't be scared. Be ready." Frederick's eyes were clear, intense. "Promise me you'll read this. Promise me you'll at least consider what I'm asking." "I promise." Frederick seemed satisfied. He leaned back in his chair, suddenly exhausted. "Good, that's good." 3 days later, on a morning when the first robins had returned and the air smelled of wet earth and promise, Jonah arrived at the lodge to find Murphy sitting outside Frederick's bedroom door, whining softly. He knew before he opened the door. Frederick lay in bed, peaceful, his hands folded on his chest. He'd gone in his sleep, which was a mercy. No pain, no struggle, just a quiet slipping away between one breath and the next. Jonah stood in the doorway, unable to move. The grief hit him like a physical blow. Another person he'd loved, another hole torn open. He'd known this was coming, had been preparing for it, but knowing didn't make it easier. Murphy pushed past him, climbed onto the bed, and laid his head on Frederick's chest, as if trying to will the old man back to life. "I know, boy," Jonah whispered, his voice breaking. "I know." The funeral was small. Bertram Shaw came, looking genuinely sorrowful. A handful of townspeople who'd known Frederick in passing. Gwendolyn Pierce, the attorney, standing respectfully in the back. Jonah spoke about Frederick's kindness, his wisdom, the unexpected gift of their friendship. He didn't trust himself to say more. After the service, as others offered condolences and drifted away, Gwendolyn approached Jonah privately. "Mr. Wells, I need to speak with you about Frederick's estate." Jonah nodded numbly. "You're the sole beneficiary." The property, the lodge, all contents, and a substantial financial trust. Everything. The words didn't register at first. There must be a mistake. There's no mistake. Frederick was very clear about his wishes. I have his will, his trust documents, everything properly executed and filed. She handed him a folder. This is all legal and binding. The estate is yours. Jonah stared at the folder, unable to process what she was saying. There's also this. Gwendolen handed him another envelope. Frederick instructed me to give you this after his death, along with any other materials he'd left for you. That night, alone in the lodge with Murphy, Jonah sat at Frederick's desk. 2 envelopes before him, the sealed one Frederick had given him, and the new one from Gwendolen. His hands shook as he opened Frederick's envelope first. A document fell out, DNA test results. The name on the paper made no sense at first. Frederick Alder Jr., deceased 2020. A son. Frederick had a son he'd never known about. Jonah opened the second envelope. Frederick's letter, pages of careful handwriting explaining everything. The story unfolded like a revelation. 5 years ago, Frederick had hired investigators to find Isabeau. She died in 2015. But the investigators discovered she'd had a child, Frederick's child, conceived before he left Paris. A son she'd named after him, raised alone before remarrying. Frederick Jr. had died in a car accident in 2020, never knowing his biological father existed. But Frederick's investigation hadn't stopped there. He'd learned everything about the son he'd lost, school records, photographs, employment history. And in a childhood photo from 1975, he'd found something impossible. A picture of 2 boys at summer camp, arms around each other, both grinning at the camera. One labeled Frederick Alder Jr., the other labeled Jonah Wells. Jonah's hands trembled so badly he nearly dropped the letter. Freddie, his best friend from childhood. The boy he'd spent 3 summers with at camp. The friend who'd moved away when they were 13 and gradually faded from memory. Freddie had been Frederick's son. The letter continued, explaining how Frederick had spent 2 years finding Jonah, learning about his life, his wife's death, his struggles. How he'd orchestrated the handyman advertisement, knowing Jonah would see it. How their meeting had never been coincidental. I couldn't give my son anything in life, Frederick wrote. But I can give his best friend, the brother he loved, the life I wished I could have given him. You showed up when I needed you, not knowing I'd been looking for you. That's who you are, Jonah, someone who shows up. My son loved you. Now I do too. This is not charity. This is family. Jonah spent 3 days in shock, moving through the lodge like a ghost. The revelation had shattered everything he thought he understood. Every conversation with Frederick, every shared meal, every moment of connection, all of it reframed by this impossible truth. Frederick had known, had planned their meeting, had orchestrated everything. But had the friendship been real? Or had Jonah been playing a role in Frederick's elaborate plan without knowing it? The bronze key felt heavy in his pocket. The locked room on the 3rd floor, Frederick had told him he'd know when it was time to open it. Now was the time. Jonah climbed the stairs with Murphy following close behind. The 3rd floor was dusty, unused. At the end of the hallway, a door he'd never opened. He fitted the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. The room was a shrine to a life unlived. Photographs covered every wall. Frederick Jr., Freddie at every age. Baby pictures, school photos, teenage years, college graduation, adult life. Frederick had documented the entire existence of the son he'd never met. And Jonah was in so many of them. He moved through the room in a daze, seeing himself as a child. 8 years old at summer camp, arm around Freddie's shoulders. 10 years old at a birthday party, both boys covered in cake. 13 years old, the last summer before Freddie's family moved away, both of them sunburned and grinning. He'd forgotten. How had he forgotten someone who'd been so important? But memory is selective, and childhood friendships fade when distance and time intervene. If Freddie had moved across the country, they'd exchanged a few letters, then lost touch as teenage life consumed them both. Jonah had gone to college, met Helen, built a life. Freddie had become a pleasant but distant memory, filed away with other childhood things. Now those memories came flooding back. Freddie teaching him to skip stones. Freddie sharing his lunch when Jonah forgot his. Freddie defending him from bullies. Freddie, who'd been the closest thing to a brother Jonah had ever had. A table in the center of the room held more documents. Newspaper clippings about Freddie's death. A car accident on a rainy highway, instantaneous. Obituaries, mentioning his work as an engineer, his volunteer activities, his kind nature. No mention of a father. Frederick had compiled everything, created a comprehensive record of the son he'd discovered too late. The tragedy of it was suffocating. Father and son had lived their entire lives separately, never knowing the other existed, connected by blood, but divided by circumstance and a woman's silence. Had Isabeau ever told Freddie about Frederick? The records suggested not. Perhaps she'd believed it was kinder that way. Perhaps she'd been protecting them both from a relationship that couldn't be. Jonah sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Frederick had watched him through the lens of his dead son's memories. Had loved him by proxy, the way he would have loved Freddie if he'd had the chance. Was that manipulation? Or was it love finding the only path available to it? Over the following days, the phone rang constantly. Gwendolyn Pierce needing signatures, the bank requiring verification, and the townspeople, their whispers had become accusations. Bertram Shaw confronted him at the post office. "Did you know?" Bertram demanded. "Did you know who Frederick was when you started working for him?" "No," Jonah said honestly. "I had no idea about any of this. People are saying you conned him, that you manipulated a lonely old man." "I didn't. Then why would he leave you everything? A stranger he knew for 4 months?" "Because I wasn't a stranger." The words came out harsh. "I was his son's best friend. His son who died never knowing Frederick existed. Frederick found me, yes, but I didn't know he was looking. I didn't know any of it until he was already gone." Bertram's expression softened slightly. "That's the truth?" "That's the truth. But not everyone believed it." Jonah heard the gossip everywhere, at the general store, the diner, even at the bank. The gold digger who'd targeted a vulnerable elderly man. The con artist who'd wormed his way into Frederick's life for money. It stung worse, because part of him wondered if they were right. Not about his intentions, those had been genuine, but about the relationship itself. Had Frederick ever really seen him? Or had he only seen a ghost of his son, a connection to the family he'd lost? Jonah considered refusing the inheritance, walking away from all of it, donating everything to charity, disappearing back into anonymity. He even drafted a letter to Gwendolyn Pierce, explaining his decision. But then he found Frederick's journals. They were in the study, dozens of leather-bound volumes spanning decades. Jonah read them chronologically, watching Frederick's life unfold in handwritten pages. The diplomatic career, the loneliness, the regret. Years of entries about Isabeau, about the choice that had defined everything after. And then, 5 years ago, the tone changed. Frederick had found Isabeau's grave in Paris, had learned about their son, had discovered too late that he'd had a family and lost it before knowing it existed. The entries became darker. Suicidal thoughts appeared. Questions about whether his life had meant anything, whether he'd contributed anything of value to the world. Then 2 years ago, a shift. Frederick had found the photograph of young Jonah and Freddie, had hired investigators to locate Jonah. The entries showed Frederick's internal debate. Was it wrong to seek Jonah out? Was it manipulation? Or was it the only way to honor his son's memory? One entry, dated 6 months before Jonah arrived in Pinehaven, struck him deeply. "I've decided to do it, not to manipulate or control, but to give Freddie's brother the help he needs. I've watched from afar long enough. I know about Helen's death, about the medical bills, about Jonah's struggle. My son loved this man like a brother. If I can't help Freddie, I can at least help the person Freddie loved. Not as payment or manipulation, but as an act of love, the only kind I have left to give." Later entries documented their growing friendship. Frederick's surprise at how genuine the connection felt. His gratitude for companionship he hadn't expected. The final entry, written the day before Frederick died, made Jonah's vision blur with tears. "If Jonah accepts this inheritance, my life will have meant something after all. Not because of my career, not because of wealth accumulated, but because I'll have helped someone who deserved it. I'll have honored my son's memory by caring for his brother. That's legacy. That's redemption. I only hope Jonah can forgive the deception and see the love underneath it. He gave me 4 months of genuine friendship when I expected to die alone. That gift is worth everything I'm leaving him. Jonah closed the journal, tears streaming down his face. Frederick had orchestrated their meeting, yes, but the friendship had been real. The care had been genuine, and the inheritance wasn't payment or manipulation. It was a father's love for his son, channeled toward the person his son had loved. Jonah made his decision. He called Gwendolyn Pierce. I'm accepting the inheritance, he said. All of it, and I'm going to honor Frederick's vision for this place. 3 weeks after Frederick's death, Jonah sat in Gwendolyn Pierce's office and signed the final documents. The lodge, the property, the financial trust, all legally his now. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like a mantle he hadn't asked for, but would wear anyway. What will you do with it? Gwendolyn asked, her professional demeanor softening with genuine curiosity. And Jonah pulled out the papers he'd found in Frederick's study, the detailed plans, the sketches, the vision Frederick had outlined but never pursued. I'm going to turn it into what Frederick wanted. A retreat center for people who've lost their spouses. A place where widows and widowers can come to heal, to remember they're not alone, to learn how to live again. Gwendolyn's eyes widened. That's ambitious. It's what Frederick would have wanted. What he designed this place for, even if he didn't realize it at the time. Jonah met her gaze. I'm calling it Alder House, a haven for healing hearts. The work began immediately. Jonah used Frederick's trust fund to hire local contractors, deliberately choosing Pine Haven residents. If people were going to gossip about him, at least they'd do it while earning fair wages. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. The shuttered guest rooms were opened, cleaned, restored. Each one revealed treasures, antique furniture, beautiful linens, artwork Frederick had collected and never displayed. Jonah photographed everything, documenting Frederick's life and taste. He created a small room dedicated to Frederick and Isabeau's story. The paintings Frederick had made of Paris, the unsent letters, photographs of Freddie. The whole tragic, beautiful narrative, preserved as a reminder that love matters, even when it arrives too late. Bertram Shaw stopped by one afternoon, watching the contractors work. People are talking, he said. They always are. No, I mean they're talking differently now, seeing what you're actually doing here. Some are starting to understand. Bertram paused. Constance Gray said you could have sold this place, made millions, disappeared. Instead, you're honoring a dead man's dream. That means something. It meant everything, actually. But Jonah just nodded. One morning in late April, a woman appeared at the gate. She was perhaps 60, thin, with the hollow-eyed look of recent grief. She stood uncertainly, clutching her purse. Jonah walked down to meet her, Murphy at his side. Can I help you? My name is Phyllis Brenner. I heard about what you're doing here. The retreat for people who've lost their spouses. Her voice was barely audible. My husband died 6 months ago. I'm drowning and I don't know how to stop. Jonah's throat tightened. He saw himself 6 months earlier, lost, broken, barely surviving. Would you like some tea? He asked. They sat in Frederick's study, Jonah's study now, and talked for 3 hours. Phyllis's story poured out. A 40-year marriage ended by cancer, children who meant well but didn't understand, friends who'd stopped calling because grief made them uncomfortable. I feel invisible, she said. Like I died with him, but my body forgot to stop moving. I know that feeling, Jonah said quietly. He told her about Helen, about the months after her death when he'd wished he could just stop existing, about finding Murphy and Frederick in this place, about learning that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry the loss differently. Phyllis cried, the kind of tears that come from being truly heard. Is this place real? She asked. The retreat? It will be, opening in September. But you don't have to wait. You can come now if you want. Help me plan it. Help me understand what people like us need. Phyllis became the first unofficial resident of Alder House. She volunteered, helping Jonah develop programs and schedules. She understood instinctively what would help, because she needed it herself. Quiet spaces for reflection, group meals for connection, walking trails for processing grief through movement. Her transformation was visible. The hollow-eyed despair gradually filled with purpose. She still grieved, that never stopped, but she began to live around the grief instead of drowning in it. Other townspeople noticed. Constance Gray brought casseroles. Bertram Shaw delivered mail with stories about his own wife, dead 15 years, but still missed. The contractor's widow stopped by with flowers for the gardens. One by one, the community began to understand what Jonah was building. Not a monument to Frederick's wealth, but a living tribute to the idea that showing up for people matters, that connection heals, that no one should face grief alone. By late summer, 5 guest rooms were ready. Jonah had hired a part-time cook and a counselor who specialized in grief therapy. Phyllis had become co-director, her organizational skills and empathy perfectly suited to the work. The gardens were replanted according to Frederick's sketches. The dock was rebuilt, extending into the lake where sunrise could be watched in peace. Walking trails wound through the property, marked with benches where people could rest and remember. Jonah stood on the porch one evening in early September, looking at what they'd built. Murphy lay at his feet, grayer now but still present. The lodge glowed with warm light. Inside, Phyllis was preparing for the first official residents arriving tomorrow. He thought about Frederick, about Freddie, about Helen, about all the love and loss that had led him here. "I showed up," he said quietly to the evening air, "just like you taught me, and I'll keep showing up." Murphy's tail thumped against the porch boards. Inside, Phyllis called out that dinner was ready. Real dinner for multiple people, the dining table finally serving its intended purpose. Jonah smiled. Frederick's lonely lodge was becoming what it was always meant to be, a home, not just for Jonah, but for anyone who needed proof that life could still mean something after loss. Tomorrow would bring new people, new stories, new opportunities to practice the simple grace Frederick had shown him, the grace of just showing up when someone needs you. But tonight there was dinner and companionship, and the quiet satisfaction of honoring a promise. Tonight, that was enough. September arrived with crisp mornings and golden light that painted the mountains in shades of amber and bronze. The official opening of Alder House came quietly, without ceremony or fanfare. Jonah had deliberately avoided publicity. This wasn't about recognition or acclaim. It was about creating sanctuary for people who needed it most. The first 5 residents arrived on a Saturday afternoon in early September. 3 widows and 2 widowers, ranging in age from 52 to 71. Each carried grief differently. Some wore it openly in their posture and red-rimmed eyes. Others hid behind careful politeness and forced smiles. But Jonah recognized the look in all their eyes, that particular emptiness that comes from losing your person. The same look he'd seen in his own mirror not so long ago. He welcomed them on the wide wraparound porch, Murphy performing his unofficial role as greeter. The dog's tail wagged gently as he moved from person to person, offering his head for scratches, leaning against legs that needed steadying. Murphy had a gift for knowing who needed him most, and he settled beside a 71-year-old man named Philip, who stood apart from the others, looking overwhelmed and uncertain. "First time away from home since my wife died," Philip said quietly, his weathered hand scratching Murphy's ears with the desperate quality of someone seeking anchor. 8 months now. Feels wrong somehow being here. Like I'm abandoning her memory by trying to move forward." Jonah crouched down beside Murphy, meeting Philip's eyes with understanding. "You're not abandoning anyone. You're learning to carry her differently. There's a real difference between moving on and moving forward. One means leaving behind. The other means taking them with you in a new way." Philip's eyes filled with tears and he nodded, unable to speak. Jonah gave them the tour, showing them the carefully restored guest rooms, each one decorated simply but comfortably. He showed them the library with its floor-to-ceiling shelves, the sunroom where Frederick's easel still stood, the communal spaces designed for connection without pressure. He pointed out the framed Christmas photograph in the main hall, himself, Murphy and Frederick, the only picture of the three of them together, placed where everyone entering would see it. "This is the heart of Alder House," Jonah said, his voice steady but emotional. "Frederick Alder built this lodge 40 years ago for a family he never had. He designed every room with purpose, imagined children and grandchildren filling these halls. Instead, he lived here alone for decades, carrying regret about a choice he'd made in his youth. He died alone, but before he died, he taught me something important, that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's chosen. Sometimes it finds you exactly when you need it most." He told them Frederick's story, the whole complicated truth. About Isabeau and Paris, about the choice between love and career, about the son Frederick never knew existed. About Freddie, about childhood friendship and memory, about the inheritance that wasn't charity, but family taking care of family across death and time. "Frederick gave me this place when I had nothing left," Jonah continued, "when I was drowning in grief and couldn't see a way forward. He showed me that healing doesn't mean forgetting the people we've lost. It means learning to live while honoring their memory. Now I'm sharing this place with you because that's exactly what Frederick would have wanted. This is a place to heal together, to remember we're not alone in our grief, to learn that life can still mean something after loss." The residents listened, and Jonah watched something shift in the room. They weren't strangers anymore, not really. They were people united by the most profound loss, gathered in a place built on understanding that loss by someone who'd lived it himself. The days fell into gentle rhythm. Morning walks around the property, Murphy leading the way with his slightly slower gait but unwavering enthusiasm. Group meals, where silence was as welcome as conversation, where no one had to pretend to be okay when they weren't. Afternoon sessions with the grief counselor Jonah had hired, optional but well attended. Evenings by the fire, sharing stories about the people they'd lost, or simply existing together in the comfortable quiet of shared experience. Jonah shared Frederick's paintings, bringing them down from storage, and explaining how art had been the old man's private salvation, his way of processing emotions he couldn't speak aloud. One of the widows, a former art teacher named Dorothy, began organizing painting sessions. She set up easels in the sunroom, and slowly, hesitantly, people began expressing their grief in color and form. Philip, the widower who'd been so overwhelmed at arrival, revealed he'd been a master carpenter before retirement. Jonah showed him the workshop Frederick had designed but never used, and Philip's eyes lit up for the first time since arriving. He started teaching woodworking to anyone interested, the rhythmic motion of saw and plane, providing meditation through craft. Purpose emerged from grief. Connection grew from isolation. The lodge filled with the sounds Frederick had always imagined, voices, laughter, the evidence of lives being lived. One evening, 2 weeks into the first session, the residents gathered in the main room after dinner. Phyllis had made pot roast using Frederick's recipe, found in his handwritten cookbook with notes in the margins. They ate at the long dining table that had been empty for 40 years, and the room filled with quiet laughter, stories about the people they'd lost, and the tentative sound of hope returning. Afterward, as they sat by the fire with coffee and tea, one of the widows asked Jonah about his wife. Her name was Grace, and she'd lost her husband suddenly to a heart attack just 4 months earlier. For months, talking about Helen had felt like swallowing broken glass. But now, surrounded by people who understood intimately what loss felt like, the words came easier. The memories didn't hurt quite as sharply. He told them about Helen's kindness, her endless patience with his workaholic tendencies, her dream of traveling the world that they'd postponed year after year. He told them about the cancer diagnosis that had come too late, the medical bills that had consumed their savings, the financial collapse that had followed her death. And he told them about the guilt, the crushing, suffocating weight of all the time he'd wasted, all the moments he'd taken for granted, all the later and next year that had never arrived. "I thought I'd never forgive myself," Jonah said, his voice thick but steady. "I thought the guilt would drown me. Frederick helped me understand that forgiveness isn't forgetting what we should have done differently. It's accepting that we're human, that we make mistakes even with the people we love most, and that the people who loved us would want us to keep living, would want us to find joy again. Philip spoke then, his voice rough with emotion he'd been holding back for months. My wife died 18 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to death. I've been stuck since then, unable to move forward, unable to let go, unable to imagine any future worth having. But being here, hearing your stories, seeing this place and understanding what it represents, he gestured around the room, taking in the warm light, the comfortable furniture, the faces of people who understood. You've given us proof that life can still mean something after, that we're not just marking time until we die too, that there's still purpose to be found. The words hung in the air, profound in their simplicity and truth. Frederick gave me that proof when I couldn't see it myself, Jonah said quietly. Now I'm trying to pass it on. That's all any of us can do, really. Accept the grace we're given and extend it to others who need it. 1 year after Frederick's death, early spring returned to Montana with the gentle insistence of renewal. The lodge gardens bloomed exactly as Frederick had sketched them decades ago, tulips and daffodils pushing through the last patches of snow, crocuses adding purple splashes against brown earth, promising that winter always ends, that life continues its cycles regardless of human grief. Alder House had become something beyond what Jonah had originally imagined. 12 residents had passed through in the first year, each staying between 4 and 12 weeks, each finding their own path forward through the wilderness of loss. Some left ready to re-engage with the world. Others needed to return for second visits, and Jonah welcomed them back without judgment. Healing wasn't linear, and Alder House honored that truth. The program had grown organically, shaped by the needs of those it served. Word spread quietly through grief support groups, through churches and community centers, through the invisible network of people who understood what it meant to lose a spouse. Jonah never advertised, never sought publicity. Referrals came from those who'd been helped, sending others who needed the same sanctuary, the same proof that survival was possible. The financial trust Frederick had left proved perfectly calibrated, enough to operate sustainably with a small staff, enough to keep fees minimal so money wasn't a barrier, but never so much that the place lost its essential character. Jonah took no salary beyond modest living expenses. The work itself was payment enough, purpose enough, meaning enough. Phyllis Brenner had become indispensable as co-director. Her organizational genius and deep empathy made Alder House run smoothly. She'd moved into one of the staff cottages on the property, having found not just healing, but home. Philip, the widower who'd arrived so broken that first September, had stayed on as a full-time volunteer. His wooden benches now lined the walking trails, each one carved with simple messages: rest here, remember, continue. Murphy, grayer around the muzzle and slower in his movements, still greeted each new arrival with gentle enthusiasm. He'd become the unofficial therapy dog, somehow knowing exactly who needed him on any given day, whose lap required his head, whose grief needed the uncomplicated comfort only a dog could provide. Bertram Shaw arrived one April morning with the regular mail delivery and a package from France. International, registered, requiring a signature. Jonah signed for it, curious about the unfamiliar return address, Sophie Laurent, Paris, France. He carried the package to the porch, settling into the chair that had become his favorite spot for morning coffee. Murphy lay at his feet, warming himself in a patch of sunlight. Jonah opened the package carefully. Inside was a letter written in careful, formal English, and a collection of photographs wrapped in tissue paper. Dear Mr. Wells, the letter began, my name is Sophie Laurent. I'm the granddaughter of Isabeau Moreau. Mr. Frederick Alder's attorney, Ms. Gwendolyn Pierce, contacted me several months ago as part of settling his estate. I apologize for taking so long to respond, but I needed time to gather these materials and to understand the full story of my grandmother and the man she never stopped loving. Jonah's hands trembled slightly as he continued reading. Sophie explained that Isabeau had spoken often of Frederick throughout her life, even decades after their separation. She'd kept photographs of him, told stories about their time in Paris, described him as brilliant and kind, but ultimately unable to choose love over ambition. There was no bitterness in Isabeau's recollections, Sophie wrote, only sadness about what might have been. The letter revealed that Isabeau had tried to find Frederick in the mid-1970s, 20 years after their separation. She'd wanted him to know about their son, wanted to give Frederick Jr. the chance to know his biological father. But Frederick's diplomatic career had made him nearly unreachable, his privacy carefully guarded by layers of State Department bureaucracy and professional handlers who screened all contact. More heartbreaking still, Isabeau had told Frederick Jr. about his biological father before she died in 2015. She'd given him Frederick's name, told him everything she knew. Freddie, the boy Jonah had known at summer camp. The friend he'd lost track of had tried desperately to locate Frederick in 2015 and 2016. My uncle hired investigators, Sophie wrote. He found Mr. Alder's address in Montana, tried to make contact. But Mr. Alder's lawyers, not knowing who was inquiring or why, blocked the attempts as potential scams targeting a wealthy, elderly man. My uncle died in 2020, never having met his father, never knowing how close he'd come. The tragedy of it is almost unbearable. Father and son had missed each other by bureaucracy, bad timing, and well-intentioned privacy protection. Both had been searching. Neither had known how close they'd come to connection. Jonah wiped tears from his face, his chest tight with the weight of it all. My grandmother died believing Frederick had forgotten her, Sophie continued. But I found her journals after her death, boxes of them spanning decades. She never stopped hoping he'd remember. She kept every photograph she had of him, saved every letter he'd written during their time together, told my mother and me endless stories about their months in Paris. She called him the love of her life, even though she had a good and happy marriage to my grandfather. Some loves, she told me, mark you forever. The photographs Sophie included showed Isabeau as an older woman, beautiful and dignified, with sharp eyes that held both wisdom and sadness. There were pictures of Freddie at every age, images that matched those Frederick had collected in his third-floor shrine. And there were older photographs Jonah had never seen, Frederick and Isabeau, together in Paris, young and radiant and clearly devastatingly in love. Sitting at cafe tables, walking along the Seine, Frederick's arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. My grandmother would be glad to know her son's best friend found his father in the end, Sophie concluded, even if it happened in this strange roundabout way. She would be glad to know that Frederick's greatest gift was love, even if it came late, even if it took an unconventional form. He couldn't be there for my Uncle Freddie in life, but he was there for you when you needed him most. That matters. That counts. That's a kind of redemption, I think. Please know that my grandmother loved him until her last breath. And please know that the legacy he left, this place you've built, the people you're helping, would make her proud. You're proof that love doesn't end. It transforms. It continues. It ripples outward in ways the original giver might never see. Jonah sat for a long time, holding the photographs with hands that shook. The tragedy of missed connections, of love separated by circumstance and timing and human limitation, felt overwhelming. Two people who'd loved each other deeply, separated by one choice. A son who'd grown up without his father, died trying to find him. A father who'd discovered his son too late, channeled his grief toward his son's childhood friend. The whole thing was impossibly sad and impossibly beautiful at once. That afternoon, Jonah added the photographs to the memorial room. Isabeau finally had her proper place in Frederick's story. No longer just a name spoken with regret, but a real woman who'd loved and been loved, who'd built a life after loss, who'd carried Frederick in her heart across decades and an ocean. The display now showed the complete picture. Two people who'd loved each other, the son they'd never raised together, and the unexpected legacy that had emerged from tragedy. Spring progressed into summer. The gardens Frederick had designed finally bloomed in full glory. Residents came and went, each one carrying away tools for living with loss instead of being consumed by it. Jonah received letters and emails from former residents, updates about their lives, expressions of gratitude, stories about how Alderhouse had saved them when they couldn't save themselves. One evening in late summer, Jonah walked down to the dock to watch the sunset. The lake reflected the sky perfectly, doubling the beauty, gold and pink and orange layered across water and sky. Behind him the lodge glowed with light and life. Voices carried across the water, residents gathering for dinner, Phyllis calling everyone to the table, laughter mixing with conversation. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, Helen's death and the financial collapse that followed, the desperate drive to Montana, seeking nothing but escape and anonymity, meeting Frederick and the friendship that had saved him, the inheritance that had shocked him, and the truth that had reframed everything. And finally this, Alderhouse, as a living testament to the idea that showing up for people matters, that connection heals, that love transforms rather than dies. He pulled out his phone and called his daughter in Seattle. They'd reconnected over the past year, their relationship healing as Jonah healed. She'd visited twice, spent a week each time, and helped in the gardens. "Hi, Dad," she answered, warmth evident in her voice. "How's everything at the lodge?" Good, really good. Full house right now, everyone doing well." He paused, watching the sun touch the horizon. "I was thinking you should plan another visit soon. Maybe for Thanksgiving. I want you here for the holidays. Your mom would have wanted that. I'd love that, Dad. And you're right, Mom would have loved what you're doing. Helping people, creating community, giving them hope. That was always her dream for you, you know. That you'd find purpose beyond just making money or climbing ladders. She wanted you to touch lives." Tears stung Jonah's eyes. "Yeah, she would have been proud of this, I think. She would have been proud of you." "I'm proud of you." After the call, Jonah stood on the dock as darkness gathered. He touched the wedding band still hanging on its chain around his neck, hidden under his shirt, but always present. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had changed shape and texture. Instead of drowning him, it had become part of his foundation, informing how he showed up for others, deepening his capacity for empathy and patience. "I showed up, Frederick," he said quietly to the evening air, to the memory of the man who'd saved him. "Just like you taught me. Every single day I show up, and I'll keep showing up as long as I'm needed." A light came on in the memorial room window. Someone was in there, looking at the photographs, reading the story, learning about Frederick and Isabeau and Freddie, learning that love matters even when it arrives too late or in unexpected forms, learning that redemption is possible, that second chances exist, that showing up changes everything. Murphy appeared beside him, pushing his graying head under Jonah's hand in that familiar gesture of comfort and companionship. "Come on, boy," Jonah said softly, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Let's go home." They walked back to the lodge together, toward the light and warmth and voices, toward the family they'd built from loss and love and the simple, profound grace of showing up. Frederick's lonely monument had become a haven. His unlived dreams had become Jonah's living purpose. His regrets had been transformed into redemption. And somewhere, Jonah had to believe this. Frederick and Isabeau and Freddie all knew that their story hadn't ended in tragedy, knew that love, once given, never truly dies. It simply changes form, ripples outward, touches lives in ways impossible to predict or measure. Alderhouse stood as proof. Every person who walked through its doors, every widow and widower who found their way back to living, every moment of connection forged from isolation, all of it was Frederick's legacy. All of it mattered. All of it counted. Jonah climbed the porch steps, Murphy at his side, and opened the door to warmth and light and the sound of people who'd become family. He paused in the doorway, looking back one last time at the lake, at the mountains beyond, at the vast Montana sky deepening into night. Then he stepped inside, closed the door, and joined the people waiting for him at the table. Home. Finally. Completely home.